All right, peace talks are expected to continue tomorrow in Cairo. I'd say on Monday in Cairo, after really going nowhere in Doha. And it doesn't help matters that Hamas is not being a direct participant in these talks, working through intermediaries, which is why Benjamin Netanyahu has serious doubts as to whether anything could come to fruition in that environment. Ehud Barak is kind enough to join us right now. You remember, of course, as the former Israeli Prime Minister. Prime Minister, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Do you think there will be a ceasefire deal, Prime Minister?
I hope, I wish it's what really needed, for sure, for the families, to the people of Israel, and I believe that for other reasons, to the other side as well. But I'm very skeptical because we have been seeing along the last several months, let me say honestly, that whenever it comes close, something happens. Unfortunately, I should admit, usually from our side, which makes it impossible to continue. So the real responsibility is on the Hamas. Hamas, Sinwar, is a terrible guy. He deserves to be eliminated from Earth. But having said that, at least for 6 weeks now, there is a document on the table of the Americans and the moderators, which Netanyahu agreed to. The other side, surprisingly enough, was ready to negotiate, and then there came certain reservation and second thought from our side, which blocked it.
Prime Minister, do you get the sense that if there is a ceasefire, and I know you're skeptical as to whether it will ever come to pass, that Iran might not respond to the attacks on prominent Hezbollah and Hamas leaders that prompted its threat to retaliate? That if there is a deal, that it's not going to do that?
First of all, I don't know. Second, several players, probably even the Americans, are trying to create the impression that if only there is a breakthrough, there will be no response from Hamas. Probably it has certain truths. There are certain debates there, but it's basically autocracy. The Khamenei will decide. Probably they will separate themselves from the Hezbollah. They will let the Hezbollah operate. And in fact, the Hezbollah possible response is much more massive and coming from close distance, so there is no enough time to intercept all the missiles, the rocket coming. So they might delay their own response. I don't believe that they will fully give up their right, so to speak, to respond. But probably they might delay to several weeks or probably several months.
Prime Minister, we have learned that when Benjamin Netanyahu spearheaded these attacks on some of these Hamas and Hezbollah operatives, he didn't give the U.S. much of a heads up, if any. How do you feel about that? Would you have done the same?
Look, I think that basically a kind of policy, it's a justified policy. The world is a better place to live in without those gentlemen who disappeared. And as you know, Israel never admitted that it's behind the assassination of Haniyeh. But having said that, it's a means that should be considered very carefully in cold head, not out of certain demand from the public or from the boiling blood to do something. We are in this business for decades, since I was, the personal special forces having to do it with my own 10 fingers. It should be considered cautiously, carefully, with clear perception of what exactly is the balance, what are we getting to get, what we are risking.
So, as I understand it, the Hamas leader you took out, the house was booby-trapped and had been for weeks, maybe months. And that makes many people wonder what other homes and facilities are booby-trapped in that region. So obviously there's a lot you can't share, but obviously in Iran, that seems to give them pause, right?
No, I think the Iranians feel a great humiliation. The Haniyeh was there for the inauguration of the new president. They hosted him in the kind of secure place of the Revolutionary Guards. So they got humiliated. I cannot fully penetrate their souls and their consideration. They are now a part of a newly emerging strategic global axis made of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. They are fighting for influence. They are fighting for certain military targets now in Ukraine. They are fighting for the sympathy of the global South. So probably they have certain limitation stemming out from these axes which have much higher priorities. Now, first of all, Ukraine, what happens there around Kursk is quite dangerous from the Russian point of view. Iran happened to be, it's an irony here of history, Iran is a major supplier of advanced technology to Russia. Who could think about it 20 years ago? And they are major supplier of oil to China. And the oil fields are probably the first target that might be hurt if there is a major clash with Israel. So they have several considerations, and they are known to be patient. They are chess players, not backgammon or checkers.
Prime Minister, Donald Trump has said repeatedly on the campaign trail, none of this would have occurred down to Hamas's attack on your country back on October 7th if he were president. Do you agree with that?
I cannot pass a judgment on ifs. In history, it's a quite unstable kind of ground. It's natural for everyone who was not there to think that if he were there, it was better. And you might find some people in Israel who would say, if I would have replaced Netanyahu, it would never have happened. And so I don't think that we have to, on this regard, to look to the Americans. We have to look inside, in the mirror, and find what exactly has happened and how. And in reality, the polls in Israel say that until now, even 10 months after the beginning of the war, still 4 out of 5 Israelis see the main responsible in Netanyahu as a prime minister, because he was in power for 15 years and he came to power promising that he is the only one who can destroy Hamas. It ended up with October 7 and with the worst-led war in our history. But of course, he's not alone. There are the heads of the army, the heads of the intelligence. There are more than one guy responsible. But 3 out of 4 Israelis, adult Israelis, believe that Netanyahu has to resign, including an extremely significant fraction of his own voters. So basically, it's clear that he's legally the prime minister, but he totally lost the trust of the public. And it calls for a change, for thinking seriously on changing the team at the top. Even the judicial reform that he promised at the opening of the war, that he will put it aside, he will not touch it as long as there is a war, it is run on steroids right now. 6 weeks ago, there was a ruling of the Supreme Court saying clearly, in clear Hebrew words, the general attorney, she's a tough lady, she is the law in between any 2 major decisions of Supreme Court. And the executive branch has not opportunity, but commitment to obey her directive. And Netanyahu patently breaks it, and to the best of my judgment, it brings Israel to the verge of de facto dictatorship. That should be stopped.
All right. Well, that's what happens. There's a lot that still has to be resolved, to your point, Prime Minister, but very good having you on, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.